You're listening to the Author Stories Podcast, bringing you the story behind the stories and the storytellers.
Margaret White,
Terry Brooks,
Sheena Kamal,
Matthew Quick,
J.T. Ellison,
Walt D. Williams,
Brad Thor,
Corey, Dr. O,
Brandon Sanderson,
Robin Mom,
Ernest Klein, Jim Butcher,
Sherwin Harris.
Visit hankgarner.com for archives of all the shows. Today's guest is
Lisa Jewell.
Thanks for tuning in to the Author Stories Podcast today. You can find links to all of the shows at hankgarner.com. There's a handy sidebar with links where you can subscribe to the show any way that you like to listen to podcasts. There's a link there. It's hankgarner.com. There's more than 500 shows. Dig in and find something that you would enjoy. I'd like to tell you about some sponsors today before we get started. Author Mary Buckham has a 3-book set. She's a USA Today bestseller. The Invisible Recruits, The Beginning, a 3-book set. Kindle edition is on sale now for $2.99. That's 3 books for $2.99. Join new IR agents Alec Nozick and Kelly McAllister as they struggle to master their newfound preternatural abilities while being thrown into a dark world of danger and intrigue. Being an invisible recruit means learn hard lessons fast or die trying. Hidden from a world unaware of magic, Alex and Kelly are members of a group of operatives known as the Invisible Recruits, the only ones willing to stand between mankind and those powerful preternatural factions, seeking to change the balance of power and gain world domination. While battling for their lives, Alex and Kelly both must deal with dangerous creatures, mysterious pasts, shape-shifting brothers, and more. What could possibly go wrong? Begin with the novella that started it all, Invisible Prison, to discover how Alex Nozick first met the IR team. Then join Alex on her initial solo mission in Invisible Magic. Next, it's time to join teammate Kelly McAllister in a race to uncover secrets and stop evil growing in the heart of Africa. Mary writes stories full of grit and determination with plenty of action, but always with a sense of hope and a good dollop of romance. Get the 3-book set for only $2.99. Invisible Recruits, The Beginning, a 3-book set for Kindle. Also, I'd like to thank George Kramer. His new book, To Some It's Just a Rose, is out now. Nancy Hemingway is a beautiful, wealthy heiress that has a penchant for attracting weirdos. When roses start mysteriously appearing at her doorstep, at work, and everywhere she turns, her friends begin disappearing. Nancy enlists her eccentric cousin Etna to help her figure out what's going on, only to discover that Etna isn't who she thought she was. Nothing is as it appears to be, and someone is targeting Nancy. Can she outsmart this lunatic and find her friends before it's too late? The new psychological thriller from George Kramer, To Some It's Just a Rose. Thank you to J.R. Hanley and Chris Winder. Their new book, Breach Team, is out now. Survival means fighting through the unknown. Corporal John Harden is a decorated soldier living in the shadow of his father, a celebrated war hero. Determined to make his own way in the galaxy, John develops a reputation as a brawler, serving aboard the USS Hughes. A rescue beacon brings John and his fellow legionnaires to a cargo ship thought lost 2 decades ago, and the heavily damaged alien vessel of an unknown species that took it down. With the brass demanding details and apparent survivors begging for aid, John's team boards the derelict ships, vowing to leave no man behind. On board, nightmares become reality as John and his team are separated and left behind, presumed to be killed in action. Assaulted on all sides by mysterious alien tech, John gets the chance to finally prove himself worth being his father's son, if he can survive the onslaught. The way home is inside, and John won't back down from the fight, though a determined enemy will make him pay for every inch. Breach Team is a non-stop action thrill ride with fast-paced warfare written by 2 veterans. Join the fight by getting your copy today. Breach Team by J.R. Hanley and Chris Winder. Thanks for listening. Now on to our interview. Well, thanks for joining me again for the Author Stories Podcast, where I bring you the story behind the stories and the storytellers. Today, I'm really excited to have Lisa Jewell on the show with me today. Lisa has a brand new book releasing here in the States the day after Christmas, and it is called Watching You. This book is phenomenal and is a bone-rattling, nerve-wracking read, and those are some of my absolute favorites. Welcome to the show, Lisa.
Thank you. It's been lovely to be here.
Lisa, we begin each show with the same question, and that question is, what is your first memory of wanting to be a writer or storyteller?
Oh, that's a very good question. Nobody's actually ever asked me that before, that precise question. I really don't know. I do remember starting a novel when I was about 9 years old, and it was about a little girl who lived in India, and I got her as far as Mars house, and then I gave up on it. And that was the first and last time I tried writing a novel until I was 27 years old. So, so yes, it was a moment in my childhood. I was always much more of a reader than a writer as a child. The writing thing came later, I think. What
types of stories did you love to read?
Oh, I loved all the childhood classics. Enid Blyton, I don't know if she was is she a big name in America, Enid Blyton?
Yes, I've heard of her.
Yeah, she's the backbone of children's books in the UK, certainly. I think she wrote about 300 books, and I probably read about 200 of them. So I read, the classic, that sort of classic canon of children's fiction. And then as I became more experimental, I went through a Charles Dickens phase, which I now look at with quite respect for myself. I'm not 11 years old and reading Charles Dickens. I went through an Agatha Christie phase. I went through a bonkbuster phase, like Jackie Collins and books like that. And then, so that sort of took me out of my reading years and into my teenage drinking and listening to music years. I didn't start reading again until I was in my 20s.
I love hearing what those formative influences were, because those things have a tendency to kind of pop back up in the creative process. Those Agatha Christie mysteries and
absolutely,
and that Collins tension and drama, and those things mold together to create something brand new in a young writer.
Yeah,
I love that.
And you don't know it's there until it suddenly pops up. I mean, I didn't actually realise until after I'd written Watching You that it is a proper whodunit, and it is a dead body in the library type of affair, and all the possible culprits. So that, having never written a book that showed that sort of Agatha Christie influence, it just suddenly popped up
right.
on my 16th book.
And those are, there's something we just love about those kinds of stories. It's it's kind of a familiar scenario, but everyone has a different take on it. And then, the setting, and we're getting way ahead, talking about Watching You, but it's such a great book. It's always great to see someone's new take on an old idea, and that then becomes something fresh and new, just all over again.
Yes, I think it helped that I didn't set out to write it deliberately like that. It just sort of happened.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So you talked about into your teenage years and the music and all the teenagery type things. When did writing come back to you, or when was that thing kind of awakened in you?
Yes, it's all very, very specific. It wasn't a general thing. There were absolute markers in my life story that totally related to my journey to becoming an author. So the first thing was, I hadn't read a book for such a long time. I was into art, I was into fashion, I was into music, I was into going out with my friends. And then I got married very young to a man who was very bookish. And it was very important to him that he could share his taste in literature with me. I can now see he was a controlling freak, but at the time it was fantastic that he kept giving me books off his bookshelf and saying, read this, read this, read this. And it was all books I would never have chosen myself as a 21-year-old girl about town. So that really sort of, refreshed something inside me, my love of reading. And then that marriage collapsed because he was a controlling freak. And I, at the time that the marriage fell apart, when I was in my mid-20s, I was working as a receptionist. So I was basically on a switchboard answering the phone all day. It was a fun job, but it wasn't very good for the grey matter. And so, having got my freedom back after this 5 years of hell, one of the things I decided to do that I thought would be fun would be to do a creative writing course. So I just signed up for a very, very low-key one. It was one evening a week. And it was an eye-opener how much that was all still inside me. That little girl who'd written a book, tried to write a book at 9 years old, was still there. And it was also very encouraging because I was with a group of people who all, we all sort of critiqued eeach other's work. And every week I'd bring something in and everybody would say, that's really commercial. I want to hear more. I wanted to So then the seed was, well and truly sown for what happened next, which is the real story of how I published my first book. And you can ask me that question if you like.
I will in just a second, but there's
I
know, you just lobbed a softball to me, as we say here in the States. But before I ask that question, and I am, did you have a moment? It's kind of weird how people take that first step sometimes. Sometimes you read a book and you say, oh my gosh, I could do so much better than that. Or sometimes you read a book and you say, oh my gosh, I think I can do that too. Like sometimes it's an encouragement and sometimes it's a negative reaction. Did you have either one of those?
Yes, I very much had the encouragement reaction, which did also, there was a bearing from my experience husband's books, which were very much his books, so they were boys' books. And I did have a sense then that I wasn't reading much of a female voice. And then the book that actually flicked the switch inside me to write a novel. So the book that actually flicked the switch inside me to start writing my own novel was a book written by a man, and it was High Fidelity by Nick Hornby. And I very much had that feeling of, not that I could do better than this at all, but a feeling that there was a voice there that I found really, really familiar and really easy to read, but it was a male voice, and there was a voice inside me saying, oh, the world needs a book like this, but written with a female voice. So that was the moment, and that was what led into that conversation I had with a friend of mine, who encouraged me to start writing that book that I suddenly realized the world needed.
So where do you begin? You've got the idea, you've got the encouragement, you've got the motivation and the encouragement of a friend. As someone who's never done it before, what is that first step that you take?
Well, the first step was, fortunately, given that this was back in the very, very olden days, and a lot of people didn't have a PC. My boyfriend at the time did have a PC. I also, because I had just lost my job, I was in between jobs, I had a little bit of time to spare. So that was two really important factors. If I'd been working full-time and I didn't have a laptop, a PC to write on, I might never have actually thought that I could possibly do such a thing. So I had the PC, I had the peace and quiet and the time. And then I also had the encouragement of the friend who very much wanted me to do this and told me that she'd take me out for dinner to my favourite restaurant if I did do this, and was on my case quite a lot to make sure that I did do this. And so then, of course, I'm there. I'm in a peaceful, quiet room with a PC, and I needed an idea. And actually, weirdly, the idea I had was quite dark. Having been inspired by quite a light-hearted book, The High Fidelity by Nick Hornby, I started writing something quite dark about my first marriage. And I very quickly realised that was not what I should be doing. I was in such a good place at that time. I was in such an upbeat place. I was madly in love. I was back out on the town with my friends. So I binned that and then started writing this story about a group of characters who were all sharing a house in South London. Which became my first published novel.
Well, it's really insightful that you realized what that first thing was that you were writing, and that that was not necessarily the thing that you should be writing. I think a lot of people's first novel becomes them just kind of airing out personal issues, and because it's usually kind of the thing that's raw and just under the surface and just needs to come out. But and while that may be important and it has served many a writer well, it's not necessarily the thing that you should be doing. No. And it was really insightful to realize that.
Yes, it was very much a gut feeling. This is wrong. I'm too close to this. This is too raw and too dark, and I'm not ready to write about this. And actually, I think maybe that was the thing. It was a sense of not now, maybe later, and maybe that's something that other writers could do if they're sitting down to write their first novel. and you feel that's an obvious step to take, doesn't it?
Right.
Write about the thing that's freshest and rawest and hardest inside you. But actually, that's not necessarily a reason to start writing it there and then. And I did find a time to write that story. It was much more organic, and it felt so much more right. The place I found to put that story ultimately, which was in my 5th novel. And then I was ready to write it, and it was properly homed inside the right narrative. So yes, I think there's definitely a lesson there.
Right.
To go with your instincts.
Right, exactly.
And to also know when to put it on the back burner.
Right.
Not necessarily bin it, but, keep it for later.
Sure. Nothing's ever truly lost. It just gets filed away for later.
Oh, no, this is absolutely, and this is so true of writers. Every word you cut out, you put it away somewhere, and you just never know.
Right.
And you might find a home for it or the right time to approach it again.
Right, exactly. So you finished that book. Then how did you find a publisher and this whole journey of yours kind of springboarded?
Well, I was incredibly lucky in that I finished writing the book at around the same time that Bridget Jones had just taken over the world. So in London at least, and I'm sure in America as well, publishers were just running around in circles trying to find young female writers to publish. So I finished the novel in 1997. I sent it to an agent who'd expressed an interest in the first 3 chapters. She was in fact, the only one out of the 10 agents I sent it to. She was the only one who wanted to see the rest of it. So when I finished it, I gave it to her. And she called me in for a meeting at her office, which was in her home. And I'd set my expectations very low. I thought, who am I? What on earth have I done? I've written a novel. How ridiculous. And now this woman thinks she can get it published for me. So I went to her office thinking, well, maybe she will, and maybe I'll get a couple of £1,000 out of it, and that'll be nice. And then I can tell my grandchildren that I once had a book published. But I, in fact, turned up at her office, and she bamboozled me with stories of bidding wars and film deals. And she basically made it very clear that she thought she could make me a very big deal very quickly. She said, I am going to put it out to a bidding war, and I will have you a contract within the next couple of months. And she did exactly that. And Penguin UK published it in 1999, my first novel. So it was the perfect timing for it, really. It wouldn't be so easy now. If I came up with the same book now and tried to get it published, I might have got the scenario that I'd been expecting at the beginning of, sort of low key, here's a couple of £1,000. Whereas the timing was everything. It was very much what the market was looking for, and there was a lot of money in publishing at that time as well. So they gave me a really good-sized advance that was life-changing. And the whole thing was a fairy tale. Oh, it was a fairy tale. I still look back on it, and it makes me goosebumpy just thinking about it. It really was it was a dream come true. It was absolutely remarkable, and I was so lucky to have had that experience, because I know that a lot of writers don't get that experience at all. And I'm equally lucky that I'm still out there doing the same thing and still getting paid for it 20 years later,
right? Which
is another thing that not all writers get to experience. So, yeah, my journey has been very blessed indeed. Well,
it's I think it's always great to hold on to that attitude of this may not turn into anything, but I can always say that I did it. And then everything good that happens after that is just, it's all bonus. It's all, it helps you kind of hold on to the magic of when the moment happens. There's something about just keeping those expectations in check, I think is always.
That's absolutely correct. That is absolutely correct. You have to look at 98% of writers, published writers, and assume that you will be like the 98% of published writers who are barely making a living, but they get the glorious experience of seeing their book in print, which is just unbeatable every single time it happens. And as you say, anything that's beyond that, anything that's beyond the joy of seeing a book in print and getting a few dollars here and there is absolutely a bonus, and to be so grateful for and thankful for.
You started or you finished that book in 1997. You've been
Yes.
publishing for just over 20 years.
I have.
How has the publishing process changed for you in 20 years? Do you see any trends? Do you have any insight that you could share with new writers of what may be coming and things they should be focusing on?
Yeah. That's so hard. I've never been able to get a handle on how the whole thing works. It's an absolute mystery to me how the foibles of the publishing industry and the trends that come and go and the 50 Shades of Grey and the things that come out of the woods that you would never have imagined there'd be a huge market for. And I think trying to second guess is a hiding to nothing, really. Trying to second guess, trying to think, what do you think might be a really, really big seller in a couple of years' time if I start writing it now? It's a mystery to me, and I've actually tried to do it a couple of times. Look around me at the market and see what's sold 1 trillion copies and think, well, maybe I could sort of try and follow that pattern, and it never ends up like that. I end up just writing a Lisa Jewell book because sort of that's all I'm capable of doing.
Well, you're an expert at
books
writing Lisa Jewell books.
I am so good at writing Lisa Jewell books. I really am.
Absolutely.
So I just go off on a tangent. I might start off with some commercial gem of an idea, but when I actually sit down and start writing it, and I'm just me, and it's just me in my head and my laptop, and there's nothing in between. There's no sort of powers that be sort of forming my experience. It's almost down to me, and it just ends up being the book that I'm capable of writing. So, and I think that's all you can do as a writer. And then you've just got to hope that you got lucky and that the book that you wanted to write or that you were able to write is a book that everybody wants to read and is a book that publishers can see potential in. I just think I wish I had answers. I wish I could say do X, Y, and Z and you'll be halfway there, but I don't know how to do it myself. So
Right. Well, I think you have to
hard pushed.
Right. And you have to, I think you have to learn to trust your voice, and know that readers will follow you and your voice. Because your writing has evolved in a way. The new book is very much a suspense thriller. You've not always written these kind of tight, nerve-wracking thrillers, have you?
No.
Yeah.
No. I've been very lucky. Well, I've been lucky in lots of ways. Another way I've been lucky is that I've always had editors who allowed me to find my own path through, my own evolution. So I know other writers who've had teams of publishers who've decided what sort of book they want to publish by that writer and keep them slightly in a little cage. Whereas I've never had that. Because I think I started off writing romantic comedies, but even within the genre of romantic comedies, mine were always slightly subversive, and people always used to say, "Oh, well, it's chick lit, but it's different," or "It's chick lit, but boys will like it," or "It's chick lit, but it's got dark undertones." So there was always that sort of, I was never quite in the genre anyway, which meant that editors would always give me a bit of freedom to push things. And so I've just been on this lovely organic journey where I started off writing romantic comedies. I then went through a period of writing more sort of family-themed novels about divorce or about sperm donation in one case, about a mother with compulsive hoarding disorder, and then gradually sort of work my way through all the themes that I decided would be interesting to write about into killing people in my books. It just sort of happened really nicely. And then at the point at which I was ready to start killing people in my books, my editor left, and the editor they handed me over to was their crime editor. And that was just happenstance. That wasn't set up deliberately. It was just perfect timing. So she's obviously very supportive of me with all my my dark, twisty, murderous novels that I've been writing recently. And she's obviously a genius at helping me edit them as well, because that's what she's been doing for 30 years. So that's how I find myself at this point, with dead bodies all over the place.
Well, the interesting thing is all through your writing career, no matter what genre window dressing is on the book, it's still a Lisa Jewell book. That voice follows you to all sorts of trouble wherever you take us. It's still a Lisa Jewell book, as we said earlier.
Yes, and it's interesting if I flick through some of my older books, which I always imagined would be horribly immature and embarrassing and sound like they were written by a 15-year-old. But actually, it's still, you can tell it's me. I do, there are things I did in my early books, like, unnecessary swear words and exclamation marks, which I now would never, ever dream of using unnecessary swear words. I only use swear words now in speech. Rather than in the narrative, and exclamation marks. No, I don't use exclamation marks anymore. So there are certain things that I find embarrassing or wrong when I look back on my early works, but the actual, the essence of my style of writing and the way I describe people and things and events has not really changed at all. I'm just describing different events.
Right. Well, let's talk about this fantastic new book, Watching You, which is an interesting play on words. If you, when you get into the book, Watching You, it's quite literal, in one sense. And it's also, we're in this, kind of idyllic, upper crust society where everyone is watching you, and I'm kind of air quotes here at my desk, in the sense that everyone is paying attention to everyone else. Everyone is making sure that everyone else is in their proper lane, and that they're behaving properly, and that they are meeting expectations. And so we've got this. I mean, from the very beginning, we've got this really interesting play on words from the title. Where did the essence of this story come from for you?
Well, interestingly, the title came right at the end, and the minute my editor suggested it, I thought, of course. I hadn't even really clocked that everybody in my novel was watching everybody else until she said we're going to call it Watching You, because the original, the genesis seed was I wanted to write about one of these slightly tacky suburban love triangles that I read about a lot in newspapers, where someone would inevitably end up with. So the wife would kill the mistress, or the husband would kill the wife, so that I wanted the mistress to be a stalker. I wanted her to be a dark shadow over somebody's marriage. So that was the starting point. So it was never supposed to be about a community, a neighborhood, and everybody watching everybody. But the minute I found the community to put this love triangle in, and I visualized it, and I saw this row of very brightly painted houses. Each house is painted a different color. It's set up on an escarpment in the hills outside Bristol, overlooking the village, where the houses are smaller and the people are poorer. And the minute I saw that, I don't know, there was something just very physical about that setup, which meant that it lent itself to everybody looking at everybody. So I've got the woman in the love triangle who's watching the man who she wants to have an affair with. So she's watching him in a very old-fashioned way. She's just lurking in corners and staring at him and waiting for him to get in his car so she can crush over him. And then the man she's got a crush on, I saw his teenage son, who has his bedroom at the top of his house overlooking the village. And suddenly he had a pair of binoculars in his hand. And it suddenly was just obvious to me that would be his role in the book, was that he's watching the community below. He's watching the neighborhood below. He's actually specifically watching teenage girls, because he's just turned 14 and discovered girls. So he's a kind of nascent voyeur. And one of the girls he's watching down in the village is a girl called Jenna, who's very attractive, but she's living with her mother, who is suffering from something, a disorder, which means she thinks she's been gang stalked. So she's watching people because she thinks they're watching her. And there's lots of other examples of people watching each other in different ways. For example, the father is watching his son for signs of being on the spectrum. And so it's just lots of different degrees of watching, lots of different techniques of watching, high-tech techniques, or, as I say, just sort of lurking in corners. And that's how and so the story evolves with everybody forming opinions of everybody else. And of course, through people forming opinions, which are sometimes right and sometimes wrong, the reader is then led up the garden path and thinks they've worked out what one character is like, and then sees him from somebody else's point of view and suddenly thinks, oh, okay, maybe they're not the person I thought they were. So it's quite convoluted and complicated.
You are a master of redirection, of keeping us guessing at each turn, and by using that, those different perspectives, and we see different angles of people. The story keeps evolving, and the characters grow and grow to be these very complex people that we know people are. When you're writing a story like this, and the twists and turns come to you, and how do you keep track of a book like this? Do you plot it out ahead of time, or are you sort of managing?
And part of why there are so many different aspects to it, in terms of how you feel about a certain character and their role in the story, is because I don't really know at all. In the writing of the book, the victim changed and the murderer changed. So at the beginning of the book, it was a different victim and a different murderer. So I'm constantly changing my mind about the people as I'm writing them. I cannot plan, I cannot make notes, I cannot decide exactly what a person is and write a little character study of them, and then 6 months later still feel the same way about that person I first created 6 months earlier. I get to know them as I write them, and I change my mind about them constantly, and I learn things about them constantly, which sounds really pretentious, but it just is true. So that's how you get these sort of, what works really well in a book like this, a sense of the shifting ground, and you're never quite sure where you are with the people in the book. Not deliberate at all, purely because I don't know what the hell I'm doing.
Well, it's just like in real life, you rarely have the same exact opinion about a person 6 months after a particular point, and the characters in a novel are the same way. That we talk a lot about how writers are the only people that can talk about the people that live inside their head without people worrying about our sanity. But they do kind of become real people, and the writer's job is to report on what's going on.
Yes,
in a lot of ways.
Yes, absolutely. And you do. I'm thinking of a character I once wrote who I could visualize his character, and I described his face very early on in the book, and then he takes his shirt off at some point during the book, and I see that he has a freckled back. It was just one of those things. It's immediately, yes, he has a freckled back. I didn't know that about my character, but the minute he took his shirt off, I saw that he had a freckled back. And it's just things like that when you put them in different situations, and there's situations you haven't set up. I certainly haven't set them up. I start every chapter thinking, right, where the hell am I going to start this chapter? What am I going to be doing with these people? And I just go with the first thing that comes into my head and make it work.
Yeah.
So I'm constantly putting my characters into places I hadn't expected to be putting them. And then, of course, they're going to respond in ways that I wasn't expecting them to react and respond. So it's quite exciting, isn't it?
Right.
Setting them up and watching them go.
The theme of obsession is really just kind of permeates this book, and everyone in the book has a different thing or person they're obsessing over, and we realize that society is just kind of this giant soup of obsession and people wishing they were something or somewhere else. Was that something kind of the dissatisfaction? There's that everyone else has it better. Was that conscious for you when you're writing this, or did that just kind of come out as the story unfolded?
Yeah, no, that definitely wasn't conscious, because that's not. I recognise that in other people, that sort of way of looking at the world, and always measuring yourself in terms of what other people have got rather than in terms of what you've got. But I'm very much, I don't go around measuring the world in any way. I'm very focused on me and the positive things around me. So no, I didn't set out to explore that as a theme, but it's good that it came out anyway, because it is an interesting. I think it's quite a modern thing as well, as we're more and more we see more and more of other people's lives. We're more and more aware of what other people are doing and what they look like when they're on their holidays, and how much fun they're having with their dog on the beach, and so it's harder and harder to feel satisfied with what you've got these days, when you're constantly bombarded with social media updates on how rough time everybody else is having.
of how everyone else is pretending to live.
Exactly.
Right.
I don't subscribe to any of that, but I can totally see how difficult and how challenging that must, particularly for young people.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, there is a bit in the book where the teenage girl, Jenna, has fallen out with her best friend, Bess, and because she signed up to the Maps app, she can literally see a visual representation of her best friend, Bess, at somebody else's house with all their other friends. It's just, it doesn't get much. If I'd had that as a teenager, I would have been so insecure. Actually be able to see all my friends having a good time without me on an app on my phone. So yes, I do get that.
Other than being a great and fun character study, looking at ourselves and our communities, like we said earlier, this book is also a fantastic whodunit. At what point in the writing did you realize that we had kind of morphed into that?
I really don't know. I think it was a point. I don't know. I think that might be a spoiler. I don't think I can say it. I don't think there was a specific point, but there was one detail that I added, a physical detail. It's actually a very small object that's found in the first chapter by the body of the murder victim, which I'd already, because I wrote that scene, the first scene, way down the line. So the object that's found by the body, I'd already written about in a completely different context. And it was a sort of a moment of like, I could use that object to make the reader think that something else happened, or that there was somebody different. I don't want to say too much because it is a spoiler. And I think that was a moment of thinking this could be, a murder mystery whodunit, because that's a proper little red herring. That's a little technical, not like a nut and a bolt type of mechanism. But yes, I think that was the moment. But I didn't quite realise how much of a whodunit it was going to be until I'd finished writing it.
Because you are discovering the story as you go, when you finish that first draft, what is your editing process like? And do you give yourself time after that first draft before going back and rereading the story and seeing what could be fleshed out, what could be added, or do you edit as you go along in the story?
Yeah, I write quite a polished first draft, actually. I don't like leaving scruffy prose in my wake. I can't relax if I know that there's just some rubbish bit that's not properly written. I know that I might have to rewrite the story because I've gone down the wrong path. So all the writing that hits the page is usually quite nice quality writing. And so by the time I've written and typed the end, I just chuck it at my editor, really, because I know that she can read it and not think, what the hell is she talking about here? And where's the missing sentence there? Because it's all been properly written.
Right.
And I totally trust her to tell me exactly what I've done wrong and how to fix it. And she does every single time. The last 3 books, she should virtually be on the front cover with me, my name, because she has such a huge part of, she will read it and she will instantaneously know how to fix the thing that I know is wrong with it. So that's what I do. I keep writing. I very rarely go backwards unless I know I've really cocked up. And then I get to the end and give it to my editor and let her fix it, which is a luxury.
Well, that's really fantastic, because we think of writing as this completely solitary experience, and the initial stages are, but there's, no matter how many books you've written, how many you've published, you still have to, humbly present it to someone else and ask for their opinion and help. And most times, that is a beneficial experience for the writer.
Absolutely. And I've got to say, if you're not capable of taking criticism from an experienced editor who's edited 100 books before yours, then you're probably in the wrong industry, and you should probably not be doing book writing. It's really, really important to let go, and that is, you press send on that email to your editor, you really do have to let go. You have to say, okay, I've done my bit, and now I need to let an expert get their hands on it and fix it for me.
Well, and it's better to have that input from someone whom you trust and who has a vested interest in your story being the best it can be, because otherwise you'll hear about it on Amazon and in the trade papers and
all those reviews that say, why has an editor even looked at this? This editor should have worked harder to fix it. There are so many reviews that actually specify that they feel the book needed a really good editor. So yes, exactly.
Yeah, you're going to get that criticism one way or another, and you'd much prefer have it the constructive kind from someone who loves you.
Yes.
Oh.
Yes, absolutely. And in fact, you should be more worried if you hand in a manuscript to your editor and they say saying it's fine. Then they don't care about you.
Oh, that's got to be painful.
Yes.
Lisa, how long does a book like this take you to write?
So I usually start tentatively around March or April. When I say tentative, I kind of write when I can get my head down. So a few thousand words here and there. Then I always take the summer off to spend with my children. And then I really start working properly in September when they go back to school. So I would say the meat of the book, which I then deliver at the end of the year. So what's that, 4 months?
Right.
Yes, I would say it takes me 4 months of proper writing to finish a book, but it is kind of in the works for about 9 or 10 months.
That's I think once you get that kernel of the story, it will kind of refuse to leave you alone. And, we talk about daily writing habits and sitting in the chair and, hands on the keyboard and getting the work done. But I don't think you can minimize the time, that you're going about life and the story's kind of growing in your head and percolating and kind of, cooking down into the thing that it will be.
Yes. And I know some writers who are under so much financial pressure, who write under pseudonym, so they're publishing 2 or 3 books a year, who will literally finish one book on the Friday and start the next book on the Monday. And the thought of that is quite terrifying to me, because I don't understand then how you get the time. Where has that story come from? Where has it been growing? Where has it been sitting? I can't quite get my head around that. But because for me, that is, as you say, that's absolutely part of the process, is those weeks or months where it's inside your head and you're giving it layers inside your head and making it into something that you can sit down and start writing, which to me is massively important.
For sure. The new book is called Watching You. It is absolutely fantastic. I'm a huge fan of this type of book, and I'm a big fan of what you do, Lisa. If people are just learning about you and your work, is there a place where they can find you online, maybe connect with you, dig through your back catalog and all that good stuff?
Yes. I used to have a website in the UK, but it died. And so my lovely American publishers made, it's called lisajewellbooks.com, I think.
Yes.
lisajewellbooks, one word, .com. I'm also on Twitter occasionally. I'm on Instagram rarely. But yes, so I can definitely be contacted or investigated in various places.
Excellent. We'll put a link to it in the show notes so that everyone can easily find it. Lisa, are you working on a new project now?
Yes, I am. It's a book that, again, I started in March. I'm now not going to deliver this one by the end of the year because I've been moving house and renovating and what have you. So I've lost a few weeks of my vital 4-month slot. So I'm hoping to deliver it at the end of January instead of the end of December. So it's my 17th novel. And it's very, very different to Watching You. But yes, all will be revealed next year.
Yeah. Well, I guarantee it'll be a Lisa Jewell novel when it's done.
It will definitely be a Lisa Jewell novel.
Go.
Absolutely. Yes. I can guarantee you that too.
Lisa, it's been such a great pleasure to talk to you. We're going to link up everything in the show notes. The book, Watching You, comes out the day after Christmas, which we don't have a proper name for here in the States. I think you guys call it Boxing Day.
We call it Boxing Day, yes. Yeah, and it's always a holiday here as well.
Nice. Well,
whereas I know publishers have got to go into work on Boxing Day because my book's coming out. So.
Right. Well, when people are hearing this a couple of days before Christmas, they will. I know people will be lining up at the bookstore or on Amazon to fill their Kindle on the day after with Watching You. Lisa, thank you so much for taking time to come on the show today.
Thank you so much for having me. I've loved every minute of it. It's been wonderful. Thank you. And Merry Christmas to you.
Merry Christmas to you. Ernie Howard has a new book up for pre-order. It's called Melody 8. My mother used to sing to me when I was scared at night. She would lay beside me and I would place my head on her chest, hearing the song through the vibration of her body. I loved my mother's voice right up to the day she was put to death because of it. If you're a lover of post-apocalyptic stories, you need to get ready for a new twist on the genre. We must change the vibration, or the frequency will forever change us. Melody 8. Pre-order it now from Ernie Howard. Soulbreaker by Clara Coulson is free right now. There's a dangerous monster loose on the streets of Aurora, Michigan, and Detective Cal Kinsey is determined to stop it, or die trying. 2 years ago, Cal Kinsey was an up-and-coming cop in the Aurora Police Department, but during a fateful nighttime stakeout in search of a prolific killer, Cal witnessed the darkest corner of his dreams come to life. A rogue vampire slaughtered his partner and introduced Cal to the supernatural world he never knew existed in the shadows. Soulbreaker is free now from Clara Coulson. There's a link to it in the show notes. Also by August Ansel, After the Pretty Pox, The Attic. A searing act of bioterrorism, a catastrophic plague they call the Pretty Pox. Most of the human race is dead, and for 2 years, Ari McInnes has been alone, riding out the aftermath of the disease. Hidden in the attic of her ruined home, Ari survives by wit and skill, ritual and habit. Convinced that humans are little more than a dangerous fluke of nature, she chooses solitude, even in matters of life and death. Ari's precarious world is upended when her youngest brother, a man she's never met, appears out of nowhere with a badly injured woman. Their presence in the attic draws the attention of a dark watcher in the woods, and Ari is soon forced to choose between the narrow ideas that have sustained her and a stubborn instinct to love and protect. In Book 1 of August Ansel's captivating post-apocalyptic series, After the Pretty Pox cast an unwavering eye on what it means to be human in a world where nature has the upper hand, and the only rules left to live by, for good or ill, are the ones written on our hearts. After the Pretty Pox, The Attic. There's a link to it in the show notes. Now on to our show. Thanks for listening to the Author Stories podcast. You can find archives of all of the shows at hankgarner.com, and when you're there, please subscribe. Up next is an audiobook clip from Richard Gleaves' The Jason Crane series.
I'm melting, cried Joey. Take the picture already. He stood with one arm around the bronze waist of the Bewitched tribute statue, Samantha Stevens, riding a broom across a crescent moon. Jason tried in vain to frame the shot without any tourists in it, but that was impossible. From all points of the compass, a merry horde had arrived for Salem's 2-day summer psychic fair. All the commuter trains had burst open, like cornucopias filled beyond capacity, spilling endless fruits and nuts onto the red brick sidewalks of Essex Street. A vampiress in lavender shorts and feathered boots sold maple chocolate walnut fudge in front of the Witch City tattoo parlor. A near-naked gypsy in purple-green veils danced with a pheasant in her arms around a plug-in Hanukkah menorah. A fat man in a fetching blue jeans dress sold amethyst and citrine charm bracelets in front of Medusa Cafe, But his stand got knocked over by a one-armed crone driving a mobility scooter who sang "choo-choo" as she passed, her stump on the wheel, her lipstick ghastly, her gnarled right hand raised in trailing plumes of noxious cigarette smoke. Chewbacca leapt out of her way and slapped sparks from his fur. He gave a disgruntled growl before going back to playing Summer Lovin' on his ukulele. The old one-armed dervish drove off, "Choo-choo!" parting a crowd of wanderers, slack-jawed tourists with camera straps tight across their bellies, yellow-vested police on segways, elderly rollerbladers, face-painted infants and harried parents, and college girls. So many hot, hysterical college girls that you'd think somebody had napalmed a sorority house. "Jason, are you deaf?" "Sorry." Jason raised the phone and took the shot. Joey inspected the photo and nodded in approval. "Your turn." "No, thanks." "Do it, Shaggy. Don't make me hex you." Jason gave in and traded places. He put an arm around Samantha's metal back. Her bronze body had flushed in the afternoon sun, warm through his glove, but her eyes were weary. No, downright creepy. And her smile was forced, like a Disneyland princess who'd had her toe stomped. "Say chowder," cried Joey, who'd been practicing his New England accent all morning. "Come on, man. Say chowder." "Fine, chowder." Joey got the shot, and Jason surrendered Samantha to a chubby kid wearing a Gandalf beard who climbed up to worship her bronze bosom.